Olha só, esse vídeo, Jordan Peterson está trazendo uma luz sobre os acontecimentos dos protestos dos caminhoneiros no Canadá. Eu quero que você tenha o foco, que é essa a intenção do vídeo, na questão da liderança. Ele toca num ponto do momento do vídeo onde ele fala da desconexão do líder com seus liderados. É claro que ele está falando justamente de um grande problema que está tendo lá no Canadá, onde os líderes políticos, que são líderes também, estão desconectados da população. É isso que ele está levando à tona. Só que esse negócio de estar desconectado dos liderados pode acontecer na sua casa, pode acontecer na sua empresa, acontece com todas as pessoas que lideram. Então, preste atenção no vídeo. Se você quer mais informações sobre o acontecimento dos caminhoneiros do Canadá, você vai ter. Mas se você é uma pessoa que, assim como eu, aprecia a liderança e a maestria na liderança, bora pro vídeo, preste atenção nos detalhes. Com vocês, Jordan Peterson, que, se você não conhece, é um dos grandes pensadores na liderança da atualidade. Um abraço, Vera Belo, Marcio Silva.
That's unparalleled. I think that's an unparalleled act in Canadian history. I truly think that's the worst thing that's happened to us so far. I'm constantly surprised. I'm not by nature a cynic, really. And I'm not cynical about our public institutions. And generally, although not invariably, I'm not cynical about politicians. But the act of sheer short-sighted, narcissistic, self-righteous idiocy that went into blocking the GoFundMe funding I cannot believe that our political leadership can be that unconcerned even about their own well-being. What sort of precedent does this set? And it's basically a form of theft, collusion between a fairly large corporate entity, GoFundMe, and the government. It's like collusion between the government and the press, which is almost total now in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, Brian Peckford, who I interviewed on my YouTube channel about a week and a half ago, who is a mainstream political figure and one of the drafters of the Canadian Charter of Rights, like a respectable guy, and was never a radical, relatively well regarded by the left and the right alike in the 1980s, a solid guy, told me flat out that the reason that he announced his legal challenge to the authority of our government on my YouTube channel was because he didn't think that he could get the truth told about what he was doing by any reliable Canadian news outlet. Mm-hmm. And that's just, what do you do when someone like that says something like that to you? It's beyond comprehension. It's a planned parallel reality, which is fundamentally equivalent to a totalitarian encroachment. I mean, CBC should be shut down. Canadians should just say enough. There's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for another single dollar of Canadian taxpayer money to go to support that appallingly corrupt, ideologically warped, politically correct, collusionary media source with the federal government. It's inexcusable. And the rest of the media, well, it's part of their pronounced death spiral. You see a little exception to that. The Toronto Sun has had some decent reporting. You see it pop up now and then in the National Post. You see it pop up now and then even in the Globe and Mail. But by and large, it's almost impossible to see what's actually going on in Ottawa. Can't even get a reasonable estimate of the number of people there. And I've also heard, let's say, that this closed circuit cameras that normally monitor the city, which I believe you can get access to by public feed, many of them have been shut off. And then, I would hope that the Conservatives, for their part, would stand up in some sort of opposition. But I know full well, because I've talked to people who know that COVID policy is being governed entirely by public opinion poll, which is a terrible way of sampling public opinion because it's impulsive and narrow, which is why we have a parliamentary system to begin with. We don't have rule by direct democracy because it's foolish. It doesn't allow for any sober second thought, let's say. And so the politicians scare the public, and they do that with the collusion of psychologists and behavioral experts, scare them into compliance. And so then they're all scared, and then they sample public opinion, which is terrified by misinformation, and say, oh, look, people support more mandates, and that scares them further, and away we go. And the Conservatives, for their part, instead of although Mo and Kenny have taken some more forthright actions in the last week, instead of seizing the moment, which they clearly had in front of them, they just blew their party into fragments, like on the very day they should have been articulating the concerns of the people that they are supposed to represent. And they could have capitalized on that even in the narrow political sense. It's just beyond comprehension. The fact of the scale of this protest and its seriousness is an indication of a breakdown in communication between the populace and their leaders. And then I would say there's a twofold reason for that. One is the politicians have ensconced themselves in something resembling an ivory tower. There's a failure on the part of the Canadian populace as well, because one of the things that's happened over the last 3, 4, 5 decades maybe is the cynicism about the political sphere, the refusal to engage in the building of local civic institutions, all replaced by a notion that politics is somehow nothing but a snake pit and no decent person would ever get involved. And so you have an abdication of responsibility on the part of each Canadian, I would say, which clearly needs to be rectified. And then this isolation of the political class from the population that's replaced by a reliance on hypothetical experts in the medical and the political domain and sampling of the public attitude by opinion poll.